Up, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started because we do have a limited amount of time. So I just want to make sure that we're going here. Let's see. Just want to double check to make sure that we are live. Okay, awesome. Yeah, it looks good. So my name's Cameron McBeth. For those of you guys who don't know who I am, I run the one-on-one consultations for the calls here at Dubsado. So whenever someone has an issue, you call into me, we kind of dive into your account, and I probably talk to a lot of you guys who are going to be watching this. So, but the biggest reason why we wanted to do this FAQ&A is because a lot of times when I'm getting calls, and I get calls all day from you guys, which is amazing, and I love talking with you guys. But the biggest thing I'm noticing is a lot of you guys have the same questions. So I figured what a better way than to just go ahead and do an FAQ&A and go over the 3 biggest questions that people often ask on calls. So that way, when we go through everything, if you are a ways out from having an actual call, you might be able to just jump on one of these weekly FAQ&As, catch the answer, and then you won't need to book a call out in advance. So it's just to bring more value for you guys. Awesome. Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and get started and jump right into it. We only have about 30 minutes today. If it needs to go longer in the future, we might extend it out, but I do have a call in about half an hour today. So this one might be a little bit shorter. And if we need to expand on it later, we definitely can. So let me go ahead and I'm going to jump into my first question here. And like I said, these are the questions that I get asked the most on calls. And I kind of want to just do like a highlight every single week so that whenever you guys are needing answers and it might be a question that you were going to ask, you can just jump on here and then find out the answer. So let me go ahead and I will pull up my screen here. So the first thing that we're going to go over today is about recurring invoices and payment schedules. And a lot of you guys have questions about when do I use them? Should I use a payment schedule? Should I use a recurring invoice? And we're not going to get into how to set up a payment schedule or those things because we have so many tutorials on that. But it's going to be mainly best practices or kind of going over when you should use certain things. So if you do have questions over how to set up a payment schedule or any of that, go check out the Getting Started series. It's in the Help Center down here in the corner for you, and you can figure out exactly how to set up a payment schedule. And so we'll hide that really quick. Awesome. Okay, so payment schedules. So what's the difference between payment schedules and recurring invoices? So payment schedules, and I have some notes here, so you'll have to excuse me. I just want to make sure I hit everything. So payment schedules you want to use if the timing of your payments and the amount that's due is different. So as you can see on the example I have here, and this is just a sample one, 20% of the invoice is due after the invoice is created, and then the other 80% is due 14 days before the job starts. So with payment schedules, you want to have it set up and you want to use those if your payments are going to be different, so certain percentages at certain times. If you have a fixed dollar amount as your deposit and then the rest of the invoices due later. So anytime you have different timings on your payments or like a milestone. So for this example, we have before the job starts, you'll want to use payment schedules in that facet. Another thing for payment schedules is if you want everything to be on one invoice and have multiple due dates, that's when you're going to use payment schedules. Recurring invoices work where you will have multiple invoices on the same day. So if you want to have it where you have one invoice that's basically your total package or your total amount of services, and then it's broken down into different payments within that invoice, that's going to be your payment schedule. And so hopefully that will help kind of show you the difference between the two. Payment schedules are more multiple due dates, one invoice, and then recurring invoices are multiple invoices with normally just one due date. So that's kind of the difference between the two. And payment schedules are also exclusive to proposals for right now. We will be adding in the future where you can have recurring invoices that will be able to be started from a proposal. But for right now, payment schedules are the only thing that's exclusive to the proposal. So if you're wanting due dates to show up within your proposal, whenever they're going through the phase there with the proposal contract invoice, then you'll want to use a payment schedule in order for it to show up on the invoice at the end. So in time, we will have it set up where you have recurring invoices that will generate from proposals. But for right now, it's just payment schedules. So that's kind of the difference between the two. Those are just a few things, but I'm actually going to show you how to combine the two today. And that's one of the big questions I always get is what's the difference when you're using recurring invoices and you can also use payment schedules? So we're going to look into that today. So let me go into a test job that I have set up. And I'm going to kind of break down exactly how you'll use both at the same time. So if I go to my recurring invoices and I have my parameters set up here. So on here with the recurring invoices, and like I said, you can go back and learn how to actually set up a recurring invoice and how to make it work. But we're going to show you today how to do recurring invoices and payment schedules mixed together. So whenever you're setting up your parameters here on your recurring invoices, the first thing is you're going to set, obviously, when you want it to go out. So every month, every 2 weeks, you can play around with the time. But the biggest thing is the starts on. So the starts on date is going to be directly related to when the invoice actually gets sent out. So this doesn't mean that there's a due date attached to it. This doesn't mean that you're going to have reminder emails sent out. The starts on just means that's when the client is going to get invoiced. So the biggest takeaway from that is just remember, this is going to be whenever the client receives the invoice, but there's not necessarily anything attached to that. Just that's when it gets sent. Obviously the end date, if you have an end date, if it's more of a subscription and you're just doing never on there, then that's fine. Next, the line item area, this is obviously going to be what you're charging every single month. So this is kind of that whole package with multiple due dates with payment schedules. This is going to be whatever you're charging them per month. So you don't want to add in the full package on your recurring invoice, because then they're going to get charged that whole amount every single time. Perfect. Yeah. So the next thing is payment schedules. So we're going to kind of break down how to use both of them together. So let's say you're sending this out on, and I'm going to kind of take it from, someone might be invoicing someone on the 15th, but it's not due until the end of the month. So I'll show you kind of how to set that up. So let's just say that we're going to send this out on the 15th. So you want to invoice your client on the 15th, but it's not necessarily due yet. You just want them to get that invoice. So you would have it start on the 15th. So every month they would be getting invoiced on the 15th. Now, if you want a due date to say, okay, even though it's going out on the 15th, I need it to actually have a solid due date. That's where payment schedules are going to come into play. So if I go down here to the payment schedule and the parameters that I have set up kind of make a little more sense, sometimes it can get a little tricky when you're trying to pick the right date, but this one is kind of an easy one to follow. So for here, now, whenever you're setting up your due date, there's a few things that you have to take into consideration. If you want the due date to be recurring, so by that I mean every single time that an invoice goes out to the client every month, it has the same due date over and over and over again, because that's typically what you would want. There's only one trigger that's going to allow it to be recurring, and that is after applied to invoice. The reason why is because if you use before job and after job, that's just a fixed date. It's depending upon your job date up here. So obviously that won't keep recurring because your job date is one date. So you're not able to use these with the recurring reminders. And same with contract signed. Once they've signed the contract, that just means that's the day, it's a fixed date. So that obviously won't recur every single month because they're not going to be signing a contract every month. Maybe they are, but then you'd have to start a new recurring invoice for them. Or a new, you'd have to add in a new job, add in a new contract and all of that. So after applied to invoice is going to be the trigger that you're going to use anytime that you want that recurring due date to keep going with your recurring invoices and run alongside it. So whatever you have here on your parameters is going to be when it's actually due after when it sends. And I'll kind of explain that here. So if I have it going out on the 15th of every month, and that's when my recurring invoice is getting sent, 2 weeks after would put you at the end of the month. So that's going to be where your due date actually is. So it will kind of vary whether it's on the 30th or 31st, because obviously, the days kind of differ, but this will at least give you a due date. But the most important thing is going to be when you're going to be sending out the reminder emails that will say, hey, you missed a payment on your recurring invoice. And I know this is a lot of information, but you guys can always go back and rewatch this. So I want to make sure I get through everything. The percentage is always going to be 100 because whatever you're charging them every month, obviously you want them to pay that in full. So it'll always be 100%. And after applied to invoice, and then however many days after the invoice gets sent, you want it to be due. Like if it's on the 28th of every month, it would either fall on the 1st or 31st. It could be anywhere in there. So you can kind of play around with those times and kind of fit it to how you want it. Then the next thing is going to be the actual reminder that goes out. So say you have a recurring invoice that's going every single month, and if they miss one, you want them to get a reminder saying, hey, you missed your payment. You'll need to set it up here. So on the date where the reminder is going to go out, I have it set for 5 days after the due date. So the 15th, and I'll actually back out here so it makes sense. The 15th is going to be when the invoice sends. 2 weeks later, it's actually going to be due. But then I also have 5 days after that due date that it's actually going to send a reminder if they have not paid. So the way our reminders work is if they do pay, this will just get canceled out because it'll recognize that it got paid. But if they don't pay, then they'll receive that reminder. So that's kind of how you merge those three things together. Is the start date is going to be when it sends. The due date, or the 2 weeks after, and right here is going to be when it's actually due. And then the reminder is going to be 5 days after, or however much after. And if they haven't paid, then they'll get that reminder email. And because you have it after every invoice gets created, that means every month it would be the same due date over and over again. So that's why you need to have after applied to invoice as your trigger for your due dates. So keep that in mind whenever you're setting up your recurring invoices. If you want due dates wrapped up with those, then you'll have to set up a payment schedule. But it's pretty easy because the parameters are always going to be the same except for when you have the reminders and when it's due. But it will always be after applied to invoice and 100%. So that's kind of how you merge those two together. And so that's kind of that area with the recurring invoices and payment schedules, how those two kind of merge together. So the next thing that I want to go over, and I will pull up my second title screen, is whenever you have a proposal, and I'll jump into the proposal here, I get a lot of questions on if I have a pay in full amount, and then I also have the ability for them to do a payment plan, how do I merge those onto proposals? So from here, I kind of set up my own little proposal here. It's not much to look at, but it's effective. So we'll take a look here. So I have a social media management package, and the way that I have it set up is if they pay in full, it's going to be $1,000. But if they decide to do a monthly plan, then it's going to end up being $1,200 because they're going to pay $100 a month. So it's better to do the pay in full. So what you'll do, and like I said, this isn't necessarily the only way to do this, but it's the way that I've seen is most efficient with people, and it makes the most sense. And also at the same time, I've seen a lot of people do it, so it's common practice is what I've seen a lot of people do too. So let me edit this here really quick so you can kind of see how we have it set up. So right now, if they decided that they wanted to pay in full, so whenever you send this proposal out and they click pay in full, it's just going to ring it up for $1,000 because they're going to be paying that much. So that's where that comes in. And then if they do the social media management package with the payment plan, then it would be $100 a month. Now, I put the package at $100 a month. And that's going to be how much it would ring up if they select it on the proposal. And I'll show you how those three things kind of tie in together with the settings menu. So on the proposal payment schedule, how I have it set up is that 100% is going to be due at the end of this process. So no matter which package they choose, 100% is going to be due. So they're either going to be paying that full price up front, which it would say at the end of the invoice, $1,000 is due. Or if they select this option, then what that basically means is that they are going to be paying their first month up front. So that's kind of how the proposal can tie into everything, because on here, you would obviously set up a recurring invoice manually after they get done through the proposal process. So they can pay that original invoice, and then you can go in and then you can set up your recurring invoice basically from months 2 through however long they're going. So this would encompass your first month. And then when you start your recurring invoices, that would be your second month through, through, in this case, month 12. So that's kind of how you can merge the two together, because right now we don't have it in our system where you can have a different payment schedule that will generate based off their package selection. So hopefully in the future we'll have something like that where depending upon which package they choose, a different payment schedule generates. But for right now, you can only have one payment schedule per proposal. So this is the most efficient way to do it, because no matter which option they choose, it'll just be 100% of whatever that package is. So if they do this one, they're going to put that first month down. If they have this one, then they're obviously going to pay it in full. And at the end, it will show either 1,000 or 100. So let me actually go into a job that I have set up. So if I go to here, and then I'll jump into the job. So the way that I have this one set up here, as you can kind of see, they would be, making their selection of what it is that they want. If they do it here, and then it goes to the invoice. Well, I'm testing it through just me and not the client. But on here, since I have 100% that's going to be due, the 100 would show here. Same vice versa. If I do the social media management full price, then it would be 1,000 due at the end of the invoice here. What's up, everybody? I haven't really said hi to everybody yet, so I'm really sorry. I wanted to get through everything, but I see some comments. What's up? What's up? How's everybody doing? Good. Hope everybody's doing amazing. So that's kind of how you can tie the full payment. So if you have, whatever your package is, they can do that full payment versus if they do the monthly payment plan, you'll just do 100% due at the end. And so no matter which one they choose, then it'll obviously ring that up, and it'll be the first month that gets paid for, or the whole package. So hopefully that helps you guys who have a full package price, and then they can also do a month to month if they choose. That's kind of the best way. And another thing too that I've noticed that I think will help out as well is I think people can put a little more on their proposals as far as kind of instructing the client on what's going to happen. There's a lot of people that say, well, I don't know if my client's going to know what that means. Don't be afraid to write that into the proposal. As you can see here, I even wrote, you save $200 if you do this option. This is how much it's going to be for a year. You can even put in here that whenever you get to the end of the invoice, you're going to be paying for your first month up front. Don't be afraid to write that into your proposal. And you can dumb it down for your client, and that will make it even easier for them. So don't be afraid to write instructions in the proposal. And I've also seen that as well on like questionnaires, making sure that they actually send them and not save them. So feel free to write that in the proposal. I think it'll help you guys out a lot whenever you're moving through this selection, contract, payment process. Awesome. So the last thing that I want to talk about is going to be how to set up a workflow. And we're not going to dive into, each action and all of that, because like I said, we have a ton of content where you can go in and learn how to build a workflow and all of that. But one of the biggest questions that I get, and this is probably 90% of my calls, is they'll say, Cameron, I really want to set up a workflow, but I have no idea really where to start. And I wanted to jump on here so I can help you guys out when it comes to brainstorming how you're actually going to set that up. Let me go into the workflow here, at least to a template, so you can kind of see how it looks. And like I said, you can go in and figure out how to build it, because I actually have 2 videos on how to build a workflow. So if you want to check those out on YouTube, you can. So whenever you're building a workflow, the most important thing that you're going to want to do first is to build your content in the system first. The reason why that is because whenever you're building your workflow, you're going to be pulling from the forms that you already have built. the canned emails that you already have built. You're going to be pulling from payment schedules that you already have developed, where you can add in payment schedules into the workflow. And I actually might go over payment schedules and workflows in another FAQ&A. But having your content in the system beforehand makes putting the workflow together so much easier. Obviously, the workflow is probably the most expansive and the most easiest thing to have once you have it put together, because then it's going to be on an automated timing system, and everyone wants to use it because they hear Dubsado does automation. I really want to get my business just set up where I can set it and forget it. And that's how you want it to be set up, but you do have to put in some foundational elements in the beginning. Because like I said, when you're building your actions, so for example, this action here where I'm sending a form out and it's a follow-up questionnaire, I have to build that questionnaire before I can actually implement it into the workflow. So a good way of kind of describing it is having all of your ingredients in front of you before you start cooking, and then you're building and you're kind of baking and doing your thing. And then all of a sudden you realize, crap, I forgot eggs and I need to go back to the store because you didn't have all of your ingredients in front of you. And so that's kind of the way that you should look at your workflows, is before you actually start building, the starting process is actually in the mapping out of what you need. You need to know what forms you're going to need, what emails you're going to need. So welcome emails, thank you emails, having that content in the system first will make it so much easier, because when you go in here and you add an action in, and it'll say, okay, well, what contract do you want to send? What form do you want to send? Or what email? You already have your ingredients in place. You already have all your content in there, and it makes it so much easier to build. Rather than getting through your workflow and then you get to a point and you say, oh man, I need to go back and make my proposal, or I need to go create my contract. I have a lot of people who are on trials that have just signed up and they want to jump into workflow, which is amazing. I love the hustle, but I always tell them, before you jump in and start building, try mapping it out, sitting down. One thing I always say, if you've been on a call with me, I always encourage to do is to write out your process. So how you should think about it when you're writing out your process is, when I have a lead that first comes in, so someone comes to my website and fills out my lead capture, I get a new inquiry somewhere. Whenever I first get that lead, what does my process look like from there? And that's what your workflow is. Your workflow is essentially going to be from the moment that you get a new inquiry or a new lead throughout the process of the job. Whether that's going to be broken up into chunks where you have sort of a lead workflow and then a job workflow. This is where your creativity can really come into play if you want to experiment and do one big workflow, some smaller ones. But that's basically how you want to think about building your workflow, is when I get a lead, how do I move them through the process? And then you're going to build those actions in the workflow. So one benefit, and I'm going to be taking some questions if anybody has any in just a second here, but one thing that helps with writing out your process is this. If you write out your process beforehand of how you see the order of things going, and then also as well of what forms you're going to need, that will basically be your workflow mixed together, because you're going to look at that and say, here's my process, and then here's the content that I need. I can go and build the content and then mesh all of that together, make a little workflow sandwich, and then you can have that as everything builds there. So your whole process will be built out, and you'll have the right forms, the right tools to be able to just apply it to a lead. So if you do have questions on workflow, if you need someone to kind of help you think through your process, you can set up a call with me. I actually have a slide here. So go to dubsado.com/getting-started, and you can book a call with me, and we can sit down and kind of work through your process if you need to, or if you have specific questions on you just don't know how this particular part in the workflow will work, we can definitely sit down and chat about that. But I really wanted to make sure that you guys know that whenever you're doing a workflow, really think about what content you need and build that content out first, because then whenever you're building your actions, you already have everything in front of you. You can say, okay, I want this proposal. I want this questionnaire to go out after this contract is signed. And then you're not kind of doubling back, working on your material that you could have had done beforehand. So that's kind of a good way to look at building a workflow. So those are the 3 questions that I got most this last week are recurring invoices and payment schedules, paying in full, and then monthly payment plans on proposals. And then the biggest question I get is I want to start a workflow, but I'm not really sure how to get started. So hopefully this brought value to you guys. Like I said, we're going to be doing this every single Thursday. I'm going to be writing down different questions that people ask and then relaying them back onto you guys on a larger scale. So if you guys do have questions, I have about 7 minutes-ish before I need to jump off of here to get on my first call for the morning. But yeah, and if you do have questions, try to keep them in the lane of what we're going over, so that way we can kind of stay on task here. Awesome. Yeah. So the question is there a way to do recurring tasks? Not at the moment, but with workflow, one thing you can do, kind of a workaround until we get recurring tasks, is you can build a workflow that is 100% to-dos. So that is going to be your to-do checklist. And then what you can do is at the end of the workflow down here, just make a to-do for yourself to restart the workflow. And that just means that you've made it through everything. And now it's time to restart it again. So we don't quite have it set up where it'll automatically reoccur. But that is the way that I've seen most used, is whenever they get to that end of the workflow, just put a to-do in there to restart the workflow. You can go in and then just reapply it. But we will have recurring tasks in the future. So that'll be nice to have. Yeah, so if you do have calls, absolutely book those. Like I said, dubsauto.com/getting started. And we can go and sit down and look at your workflow, or if you have more specific questions and need help, I'm always here to help you guys out. I love chatting with you guys. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And with those workflows, the best thing that you can do is to have that process written out. Like I said, I've seen people do flow charts, where they have like the different icons, and once it goes to here, it goes to here. I've seen people that just have it written out on a scratch piece of paper. So anything like that is going to benefit you guys so much whenever you start doing your workflow and sitting down and starting to write out everything. Yeah, if you guys have any more questions, I'm here to answer anything that you guys have. I'm going to drink some tea. My voice is already shot in the morning. Awesome. Yeah, so if you guys don't have any more questions, like I said, we're going to be doing this next week. I'll have 3 brand new questions that we'll go over. So hopefully this will answer something for you guys. And go back and check out the video again. So if you want to rewatch it, it'll be posted. Yeah, but other than that, I hope you guys have an amazing day, and we'll see you again next week.